Welcome to the 44th Annual Old Dominion University Literary Festival. Our theme this year, Afterwards, highlights works that address the storms of past and present and the changes wrought upon us as we turn to face the future. I'm Kent Wascom, co-director of the festival, along with my colleague Catherine Jackson, and we'd like to thank you all for being here today for a reading by ODU Creative Writing MFA program alumni Lynn Waltz and Amanda Galvan-Wynn. It is now my honor to welcome on to introduce our reader, ODU faculty member and poet laureate of the great state of Virginia, Luisa Igloria.
Thank you so much, Kent. First, I want to say, though, that from experience, I know putting this kind of festival together is an effort which takes at least a year of planning. But the success of every festival also depends on the particular kind of vision that goes into its shaping. And so I want to give a shout out to my colleagues, Kent Wascom and Catherine Jackson, who are this year's festival co-directors, for the amazing job they've done to bring us such a thoughtful and necessary lineup of writers. Now, my very pleasant task this afternoon is to introduce the MFA alumni readers in our literary festival. The first reader we're hearing from is Lynn Waltz. Now, perhaps you wouldn't immediately think that a page turner might lie beneath a tray of pork chops or spiral cut ham, or that the story of food workers' decade-long struggles to unionize at Smithfield, the world's largest industrial slaughterhouse, underline every bite you take of your breakfast sausage. But that's exactly what is behind the book Hog Wild, The Battle for Workers' Rights at the World's Largest Slaughterhouse, written by Lynn Waltz, a journalist who has twice been nominated by the Virginian Pilot for a Pulitzer Prize, and who is currently assistant professor in Hampton University's Scripps Howard School of Journalism. Lynn is the kind of writer who is able to find those layers of story under the obvious story, whose patience and capacity for listening eventually rewards us with the stories that might otherwise remain invisible. She gathered years of in-depth research and in-person interviews throughout little towns in North Carolina and Virginia with an eye for what centers the human in every narrative, which is eventually and always a narrative of community. And those are behind every page in Hog Wild. But perhaps more thrilling to us in the ODU MFA Creative Writing Program is that well before the 2018 publication of Hog Wild, we saw many of these stories in their earlier forms around the workshop table. Therefore, I am so pleased to introduce as one of our featured authors in the 44th ODU Literary Festival, our old friend and colleague, MFA Creative Writing Program alumna, Lynn Waltz.
Thank you so much, Louisa. That was lovely. I was going to thank Catherine and Kent, but they've been thanked a lot, but I thank them anyway for all the work that they've done. And as Louisa mentioned, I did start this project while I was working on my MFA and had the help of some very fine professors who helped me craft those early versions, which then became the much larger book called Hog Wild, The Battle for Workers' Rights at the World's Largest Slaughterhouse. The book is the story of the largest union win of the 21st century. It was a battle that pitted the largest meatpacking union, which is the UFCW, the United Food and Commercial Workers International, against the world's largest pork producer and processor, Smithfield Foods. It was a vicious fight with allegations of dirty tricks on both sides, and it all boiled down to a big bluff poker game settled in the middle of the night with high-powered lawyers and executives from both sides in a ritzy hotel across from Richmond's federal court. The UFCW eventually got its union in the world's largest slaughterhouse, but it came at such great cost they are unlikely to do anything like it again. Smithfield Foods also survived. They had to unionize. They had to pay its workers millions more dollars and provide safer working conditions. But Smithfield continues to make more than $14 billion a year. It was purchased in 2013 by the Chinese for $4.72 billion, the largest acquisition of an American company. They employ 63,000 workers in North America and Europe and slaughter about 1/4 of the hogs in the United States. They also dominate the hog raising arena with about 500 company-owned farms and individual contracts with about 2,000 independent farmers in the United States alone. So this is huge. It's the world's largest pork producer and processor. But it started in 1936 as a small family slaughterhouse in Smithfield, Virginia. And my first reading is a short reading from chapter 1. When gourmands think of the famously sought-after Smithfield ham, they think of biscuits with salty slices of pink pork sliced razor thin. Indeed, to bear the name Smithfield ham, the cut of meat must be processed in the quaint historical village of Smithfield in Virginia that date back to the 17th century. Smithfield sits on the winding Pagan River in Isle of Wight County, just south of Jamestown. As early as the 1700s, the town had become known for Isle of Wight bacon and Smithfield ham, which came to be called the aristocrat of the Virginia table. But most of the hams produced by Smithfield, note that I'm using a lowercase h here, is coming out of the sprawling slaughterhouse in Tar Heel, North Carolina, about 230 miles south of Smithfield, Virginia. And here I'll do another short reading describing that. From Smithfield headquarters in Virginia, it's about a 4-hour drive to Fayetteville down I-95, then on to Highway 87. There, a steady stream of hog trucks pull into the silvery, pipe-ridden industrial complex that looms up out of a sprawling, poverty-stricken flatland just northwest of the tiny town of Tar Heel. This is Smithfield Packing, long the dark underbelly of Smithfield Foods. There, starting in 1992, thousands of workers began to emerge from the bleak economic landscape of southeastern North Carolina to receive a starting hourly wage of $8.10 to $8.60, roughly twice the minimum wage of $4.25 at the time. Today in Bladen County, where the plant is located, 1 out of 5 live below the poverty level. In neighboring Robeson County, where many workers live, there is a 31.5% poverty rate. Every day in Tar Heel, workers, mostly minorities, Latinos, Blacks, Native Americans, gas, bleed, and disassemble about 32,000 hogs a day. That's 16,000 hogs per 8-hour shift, 2,000 per hour, 33 hogs every minute, 1 hog every 2 seconds. It's punishing, mind-numbing work that leaves workers' muscles burning and hands cramped and tingling from thousands of cutting motions a day. It's bloody, smelly work with extremes in temperature as hogs are scalded and then chilled. When it opened, Smithfield Packing wasn't unionized. At the time, it was the only major Smithfield packing house that wasn't. And owner and CEO Joe Luter III clearly wanted to keep it that way. So who is this character, Joe Luter, and who are the characters who thwarted his dream to keep the world's largest slaughterhouse union-free? He decided to open the slaughterhouse in the 1980s, not in his hometown of Smithfield, Virginia, where his daddy and granddaddy started Smithfield Foods, but in Bladen County, North Carolina. Why? Why was that? Virginia was growing increasingly wary of Luter's penchant for pollution. His nickname had become Luter the Polluter. He was under investigation from both the state and the feds for polluting the Pagan River with unauthorized wastewater releases. Eventually, he received the largest EPA fine at the time of $12.5 million for illegally releasing wastewater. So he was done with Virginia. But he needed a large centralized slaughterhouse on the East Coast to reduce the shipping time of both the hogs to the slaughterhouse and the meat to the markets. So the astute capitalist, Joe Luder, he needed four things. He needed politicians who were open to passing laws to benefit the hog industry. Some would say politicians who were corruptible, politicians who would pass laws to enrich themselves, which is what happened. He also needed a place where environmental regulations were easily subverted, both for the massive slaughterhouse and the enormous anticipated increase in the number of hogs that would be raised around the plant. Third, he needed a place where legal loopholes could allow him a near monopolistic control of the supply of pigs. He did not want to deal with family farmers. He wanted to open CAFOs or factory farms. And lastly, he needed low labor cost in a non-union plant. So North Carolina, a right-to-work state with the lowest union membership in the country and a history of suppressing workers, fit the bill on all counts. Now I'm going to do another reading here of that starts out, there was only one problem. There was only one problem. North Carolina had spewed forth a spitting, scratching tomcat of a girl, not unlike many other girls at that time, trying to claw their way to a life better than their mamas. But this one girl just happened to grow up to work for Joe Luder, and she was a beauty, strong, voluptuous, willful, smart, and blonde, and not afraid to curse, pull a gun, or beat the living daylights out of anyone who crossed her. Sherry Wright Bufkin was born and raised in Bladen County, North Carolina, where peanut, tobacco, and cotton fields sprawled across a poverty-stricken flatland near small towns where closing cotton mills had left behind desperation and welfare. Every day as a child and teenager, Bufkin looked smack into the face of that poverty. The country roads carried her past families who couldn't find jobs and barely had enough to eat. Joe Luder was 30 when Sherry Bufkin was born in 1969. While Luder's father had been a workaholic, perhaps cold and distant, Sherry was an alcoholic with a temper who beat her mother. Luder's father could afford to provide his children job opportunities when they came of age. Bufkin's father could not. During the 1980s, while Sherry Bufkin worried herself through puberty, Luder, now a wealthy businessman, saw something shimmering above a flat swath of land just southwest of the Cape Fear River. It looked like gold. Bufkin had grown up on that river, sliding or climbing down rope ladders and chicken wire her daddy had strung up on its steep banks so the kids could get to the rope swing and drop into the water. Driving from home in Elizabethtown to Fayetteville, they'd pass that parcel of land and never pay it no mind. It was just 830 acres of nothing. Right past that tiny town of Tar Heel on North Carolina Highway 87, a two-lane highway that wandered up to I-95, the largest north-south trucking corridor on the East Coast. My mama worked for minimum wage. If I got a shirt and a pair of shoes before school started, I was doing good. I was above all the other kids, Bufkin recalled. There wasn't much for her to do but sneak out her bedroom window or leave it open. So Bufkin got thrown out of her mama's house at 16 and married Davy, the only boy she'd ever been with. Her daughter Nicole was born March 12, 1991. There was little work, just an endless horizon. Of course, back then, that Virginia businessman, with his obsession for building a pork dynasty, had never heard of Sherry Bufkin. But one day he would. One day he would know all about that poor little white girl from Bladen County. So there were union votes after the plant opened in 92. There was one in 94, one in 97. There was violence and beatings. Sherry Bufkin raised herself up the ladder to become the highest woman manager at the plant, and she hated the union. She towed the company line. She illegally fired union activists. She assigned them to unpleasant tasks or shifts. She lied about them. She made their lives so miserable they would leave. But then Sherry gets illegally fired herself, and her reputation for a bad temper proved accurate. She went to the National Labor Relations Board and told them everything and agreed to be their chief witness at the labor trial. As a result, Smithfield lost. And 12 years after the plant opened in 2004, the National Labor Relations Board, the judge, found Smithfield guilty of breaking hundreds of labor laws and ordered a new union vote. Now, here's where having a lot of money and a lot of high-level lawyers skews the playing field. Smithfield appealed that ruling to the U.S. District Court, setting up a game that would delay final adjudication for nearly 2 decades. So union leadership understood that while winning battles in court was important, it wasn't enough and it was going to take far too long. So they had an old trick up their sleeves called the corporate campaign. A corporate campaign is a huge public relations blitz that seeks to ruin the reputation of the target company, not by lying, but by advertising its dirty laundry. And Smithfield had plenty of that it did not want aired. Not only did it illegally fire and beat up union activists, there were numerous injured workers they would simply fire, forcing them to either sue or walk away. So if a corporate campaign is successful, nobody wants to do business with an evil company or buy its products. No one capable of such heinous acts. But a large-scale corporate campaign is not easy to run. The UFCW had to find just the right person. And that's where Gene Bruskin came in. And here's another reading. Bruskin, then 60, a career union organizer with 11 years at the AFL-CIO, labor director of Reverend Jesse Jackson's National Rainbow Coalition for 2 years before that. But he had more than experience. He had a fierce passion, fueled by his belief that the common worker has the right to decent working conditions, decent pay, and the right to join forces with fellow workers to level the playing field with corporate fat cats. Here's a quote from Gene. By 2005, we understood that despite the importance of the National Labor Relations Board decision and the strength of it, no remedy was going to come from that board. So when they hired me, they knew they were done with the labor board and they were going to fight a campaign forcing a free and fair process for the workers. We weren't going to let Smithfield cheat again. Bruskin had been raised in the steam of the 1960s, fed on the fever of anti-war activism and fueled by adrenaline on the picket line as a young school bus driver. His northern city blood ran thick with Union revolution inherited from his radical communist father. The Tar Heel campaign was to become his obsession, a challenge taken on during the peak of his long career. Bruskin brought with him a belief that union campaigns are won from the ground up, getting buy-in from workers, community, church, and political leaders. As campaign director, he was about to take over one of the largest, longest, and most contentious labor campaigns in the history of the UFCW, as well as one of the most important union campaigns of the latter half of the 20th century. And he was about to change the rules of engagement into fierce hand-to-hand combat against a corporation whose moral compass and fighting style was set by Joe Luter, the man on top of Smithfield. Bruskin was about to become Joe Luter's fiercest enemy, stealthy, cunning, challenging the kingpin by attacking his mothership. The union activist was about to launch a national image and branding campaign that would try to bring Smithfield to its knees, or at least force it to pull up a chair at the bargaining table and spend untold millions in the process. At times, it would seem as if leadership at the UFCW had taken on a bigger personality in Bruskin with grander dreams of success than they had ever envisioned or could completely control. To put it mildly, Bruskin took the UFCW on a wild ride. He marched with workers' children to the home of the president of Harris Teeter, a major customer of Smithfield. He ran protests wherever Paula Dean, the spokeswoman for Smithfield, made an appearance and outside her restaurant. He got the help of Oprah Winfrey to cancel the use of a Smithfield ham on her show, costing the company millions in sales. And he even got Barack Obama to speak out in favor of the union. Smithfield's name became blasphemous to hundreds of activist churches, community groups, and even Smithfield's own stockholders began to question their morals. East Coast boycotts against their products just tightened the screws. So I can't go into more detail than that. It's a long and complicated story, but I want to take just a moment at the end here to explain why I believe this story is important to us today. For one thing, as Louisa alluded to, it illuminates the high cost of putting meat on the table. This story repeats itself in every state that has a large slaughterhouse. When a huge slaughterhouse opens, there's a ripple effect that changes the community, changes the state entirely. The number of hogs increase, the amount of pollution increases, the number of undocumented workers increases, the politicians get corrupted and get rich. This has repeated itself in Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, and across the United States. To give you some idea, within 2 decades of the transformation of the hog industry into massive slaughterhouses and industrial farms, 90% of independent hog farmers were forced out of business. In North Carolina in 1986, there were 15,000 farms. By 2000, only 2,300 remained. That's just in one state. Meanwhile, the number of hogs in North Carolina skyrocketed from 2.8 million in 1990 to 9 million hogs in 2018. More hogs than people in the state of North Carolina. Now, if you increase the number of hogs, you increase the amount of waste exponentially. It is extremely hard to get rid of the waste from 9 million hogs. Despite a state moratorium on state new lagoons in 1997, 4,000 hog waste lagoons remain a ticking ecological bomb, flooding during hurricanes, and even tidal water. From a labor point of view, this story is important because it is the only huge industry win by a union in the South, and manufacturers continue to move there, knowing they can keep unions out and wages low. Today, just 11.1% of American workers belong to unions, down from 35% in the 1950s. Labor is in crisis, and the health of unions is directly linked to the health of the middle class, also in crisis. It also stands as an example of how the New Deal eventually failed to protect workers because it was watered down. So it took 16 years from the time the first workers were illegally fired until a final judgment came down against Smithfield. 16 years. People died. People disappeared. People gave up hope. People's lives were destroyed. Workers illegally fired in the early 1990s testified against Smithfield Foods, did not receive a final verdict until 2008, and only then because Smithfield Foods decided not to continue appealing and didn't go to the Supreme Court. Only 10 got very small payouts, and only 1 got his job back, but then he was targeted by Smithfield. So my point is that Smithfield Foods was never really held accountable. Every step of the way, they piled on more profits, bought more companies, expanded their lines. In the end, despite total condemnation by the government and the court system, it was sold to the Chinese in 2013, and those at the top were rewarded with obscene profits. Will there be more corporate campaigns? That's doubtful. We're in a new Gilded Age. During the last Gilded Age in the turn of the 20th century, it took violent strikes and attacks to force the government to pass the New Deal. In this week's news, with the release of the Pandora Papers, we're able to get a glimpse at how the wealthy warped the playing field in their favor. So this is just one story. There have been others. There will be others. All we journalists can hope for is that we can continue to uncover the truth of those who wish to conceal it for personal gain. So thank you again, ODU, for hosting this festival, and thank you for coming out to hear me today.
Thank you so much, Lynn. What a provocative story. And I think it just shows how we are all interconnected. Um, there are so many things that I could say about our next reader this afternoon, the poet and writer Amanda Galvan Wynn. But in recognition of this program's desire to honor our MFA alumni who have gone on to do even more wonderful things in the world beyond their stint here, I think I want to speak to the Amanda that we first came to know when she joined the program. Before the end of the spring semester in 2014, Amanda, then one of the MFA program's admitted applicants, arranged to visit campus where she hoped to meet briefly with students and some of us in the faculty and get a general feel of the area. She had just graduated with an English Studies degree from the University of Texas in Arlington. her second degree, as she already had a degree in biology. And about a week after her visit to ODU, she phoned and emailed her acceptance of our assistantship offer, citing that even early on, she perceived our MFA program here to be a welcoming and supportive community. And it felt wonderful to learn that she chose us, as she'd also been accepted to 6 other MFA programs around the country. It was clear that Amanda is rather, a poet to watch. This borne out by honors received even while she was still in the MFA program. These include a 2016 AWP Intro Journal Project Award, and soon after, nominations for Best New Poets and the Pushcart Prize, a 2018 Best of the Net selection, finalist for the 2017 Poetry Society of America Chapbook Fellowship, and a 2015 finalist for the Gloria Anzaldúa Poetry Prize. Her poetry is deeply thoughtful, unapologetic, fierce yet tender, an exploration of what it means to bear witness in one's art as a Chicanx writer. But perhaps some of the most cherished memories I have of Amanda are those conversations that we had around my kitchen table over food, sushi, or coffee. And one of those times she turned to me and bewailed the dearth of poetry books on craft by poets of color, addressing their experiences and realities. And I told her I knew exactly what she meant, for I had been feeling the same way since my own graduate program 23 years ago. To make a long story short, we decided to do something about it. And the result was published in 2018 by the Operating System in New York in the form of our co edited anthology of color essays on transformative poetics. It's always a pleasure to be in collaboration with a writer like Amanda, who is currently a PhD student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Not only is she the author of the chapbook Songs of Brujeria from Big Lux, but also of a forthcoming book scheduled for release from Sundress Publications in May. And may I add, they just had a brand new baby barely 2 weeks ago. So, very happy news. And please welcome back Amanda Galvan Win to the stage of the ODU Literary Festival.
Thank you so much, Louisa. It's great to be back. And yes, we do definitely miss coffee after dinner. Those coffees have just definitely stuck with us. But yes, thank you so much for that generous introduction. And thank you, of course, to the co-directors of the Literary Festival, because I know that what goes into making this work as well. So thank you, Catherine Jackson and Kent Wascombe, for putting this together, as well as for everybody who's behind the scenes, getting everything together too, the digital, because that is also a lot of work. And I can't imagine what it's like to put this together during a pandemic. So yes, so thank you to everyone who's involved as well. I've been thinking a lot, like Louisa mentioned, I am a new parent, and I've been thinking a lot of inheritance and things that we pass on. And I think this year's theme, especially, who do we come or who do we become after the storm, after traumatic events? Globally, we're still in a pandemic, but I'm also thinking more personally, in intimate ways. What happens to us? What do we carry forward? What do we pass on? So the poems that I'm reading today really circle around this idea in terms of bearing witness to continuing a legacy, what we choose to move forward. So I wanted to start this reading off with this first poem from my chapbook, Songs of Brujeria, Who La Llorona Cries For. I imagine my mother saw the 2 blue lines as handcuffs made from rivers. 21 and pregnant. The 2 blue lines clapping, announcing to her in-laws that she had made their son a father, finally. Did she think of her mother? Throughout the next 9 months, did she wonder if her mother sat outside on the porch eating sardines? Did she want to ask her how she carried a pond in her belly, or what death felt like at 32? In the delivery room, I can hear my mother, ah, mi mama, calling over and over, mi mama. Every contraction, a protest, a reason not to deliver, not to become her mother, a single mother, a mother who would leave her 16-year-old daughter. In those first seconds, I came up for breath. My mother was already calling for the dead. It's definitely a little strange to read some of these poems as a new mom, because I worked on these poems while I was in my MFA. So it's been a couple years, but to kind of go back to them and to see the resonance has been very interesting, to see them evolve. But also, as a new mother, I'm also thinking, what advice will I pass on to my child? Um, and so this leads into the next poem as well, in terms of advice that I received from my mother, and kind of being, how Louisa mentioned, unapologetic in taking this advice and holding on to it, especially coming from a mother to a daughter. I have a son, so it'll be interesting to see how these lessons about life pervade or just move forward. So this next one is, you have to be ready. You have to be ready when they are. My mother hands me dishes to wash, even when you're not. I watch her turn the faucet on. My hands heat under the water, and I wonder who told her to be open 24/7. How many times did she lie split open, reviewing a list of things to be done tomorrow? Did she learn over the years where to kiss, when to touch, how to suck, to make her husband finish quick, to end the chore, to make sure he doesn't drift into another woman's body, to say yes, to make more time, to be the good wife, the one who makes floorboards reflect the moon when it comes in through the window? And one other thing that I have also been meditating on is more of the power behind our words, the power behind speaking things into existence. Um, Especially this semester, there's been many themes of the power behind words, in terms of not only building, but also in terms of destruction. How these forces can really um, build us up or tear us down, and the fact that even our connections physically to one another um, are strong. There are also emotional and mental conversations that we might have with each other that can build us up and also tear us down. And these are legacies, these are ripples between our families, or within our families, our relationships, from whether that's from father to daughter, father to son, mother to daughter, mother to son, um, and onwards to grandchildren as well. We definitely have a ripple effect that is happening, and choosing what we say, or choosing the advice we give and pass forward, um, also ripples down into our legacy. This new poem is actually a newer poem. It was a little difficult to write. This will definitely be in my forthcoming collection. But I wanted to share it just because I believe it definitely parallels with the poem I just read. When I talk about emotional and mental advice that's being given that can cause harm, but also physical harm that can be done if we're not being intentional with our actions. My partner asks if I can buy him a new belt. At Macy's, I stand in front of the belt rack. All of them hang like tongues, their flesh hewed from dirt to oak tree to night. I cannot bring myself to touch them. An employee asks if I need help, but I am already walking down the hallway to my parents' bedroom. My hand against the wall feels every bump until I stand in their closet. My mother waits as I stare into the eyes of my father's belts. 4, one braided, one thick, glossy, the color of coffee, another thin and the color of a desk, the other a dull night. I press them between my fingers to decide which one would hurt the least, but I know they can sing about pain. They will all count my age, remind me of how old I have become, remind me of how I should know better. Remind me to clean my room, to listen, to do as I'm told, to tell the truth, to come home on time, to not trust boys, to not talk back. They will remind me of the strength in my mother's arm. They will remind her of her own beltings, that this is the only way, a prayer to keep us protected. When I think of how we protect each other, I usually feel like it's done out of fear at sometimes, fear of loss, fear of consequences, fear that we've carried on again from our previous families, especially when you put fear such a huge fear can be such a huge abstract word when you place it next to love as well. When you love something very fiercely, there's the fear of that loss, and what drives us forward to protect that love that we have. But there's also joy to be passed on, especially when we think of things that we don't want to pass on to our children or onto our family members, or even in taking care of each other. There's definitely joy to hang on to. Joy and happiness and wonderful memories. And I'm looking forward at some point to returning to Texas. Right now I'm in Hawaii, and it's a little different, just a tad. But I'm looking forward to returning to Texas because, of course, my family's from there. A lot of these poems take place in the backdrop of Texas. This one specifically brings back a lot of memories. The Songs of Brujeria. La Luna would be the brightest on Saturday nights for a quince, a wedding, or some other reason to celebrate, to fill a dance hall. Tias refilling plates with barbecue and gossip. Beer bottles humming around mouths. Children playing tag under tables until drunk abuelos trap them into norteñaing their boots along to the breath of el acordeon. When cumbia whisked her way through the speakers, the women would line the floor to sway in rhythm to Baila esta cumbia, an invitation to mueve, to the music in their blood. These were the songs of brujeria, and this was where the women in my family practiced. These were the nights my mother would take me onto the dance floor, with her long black hair cumbiaing to its own beat. She would teach me how to listen to the magic found in those nights, as if all I had to do was press my ear to my pulse to find my way home. There were many, 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 many weddings, many, many quinces for sure. And I'm looking forward again to the pandemic ending, and to having those gatherings again, and having those family moments where we can all be together, even with friends, even with friends as well. But along with cultural inheritance, I'm also hoping that I'm able to teach and give my child some also language, even though my own relationship with Spanish and in my family is a little broken. I'm hoping to pass down as much as I can. And this next poem as well lends itself to my relationship with that and hoping to pass that forward. And I just want to also shout out that the inspiration for this one came from Melissa Lozada Olvia, one of her poems. So this one is titled Tongue Untethered. My Spanish spoons the crescent of my dreams. Her feet walk inside ripples of a dress sewn with starlight. She holds my face to untether my tongue from its root of self-doubt and leads me into the dark reflection of the sky. Here we run. We run among an uproar of words sprouting. Camino, luna, estrella, casa, calle, coche, until cities overgrow in my mouth. People and places I long to hear become clear as ice melting in the heat of a Texas night. My Spanish braid summers full with fieldwork. Her old fingers moving back and forth tell secretos of spices y ganas through the frizz and curls of my Mexican hair. She tells me que linda. She tells me tu nombre es una canción. My name a song when I say it in Spanish, Amanda. Those ahs shaken free from English open their arms to envelop the bitty bitty bum bum mi familia sways to. My Spanish turns over memories half understood, dancing norteñas con mi abuelo, the beer on his breath, his boots shuffling, and the scruff of a farmer's accent. My Spanish helps me collect abuelo's words into a jar. Baila, chiquita, cerveza, ojalá, trabajo, algodón, like bits of metal in a junkyard. I press them to my ear to hear the worn leather of his voice. ¿Qué pasó, mija? Está bien, chiquita. Ojalá. My Spanish cracks open these lines to show me the softness between las palabras, the untranslatable in expressions, the pieces I feel are missing from my whole. My Spanish stays until dawn quiets the night, asks for me to sing my name into the sun because she does not want to forget its music. And I think I have time. Yes. So I have one more poem I want to share. This one again is mainly for just mothers. It's also been wonderful to be here. Definitely to be here with everybody. I've definitely enjoyed seeing familiar faces, especially during this trying time, where I feel everybody is trying to find some normalcy, find themselves. So I wanted to end here with a short poem. It is titled Hands of Mothers. Bless the hands whirlpooling sunshine into our backs, the ones pulling our bodies through the small pains of lost toys and friends, the hands that may have never planned on being a mother, and the ones that feared being enough. Bless the hands of mothers who never had one to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda and Lynn, for sharing your incredibly powerful work. And thank you, Louisa, for those wonderful introductions. Thank you all for being here for these readings. And please join us at 4 p.m. for a performance and conversation with Kareem Fahmy, and at 7 p.m. for a reading by memoirist Meredith Talasan. For the full schedule of events, please visit the ODU Literary Festival website. See you all next time.